care about current affairs, it's on the OShow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the OShow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the OShow. It's the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow.
Welcome to the OShow. I'm Laura Babcock, and on this episode of the pod, Canadian international best-selling author Linwood Barclay. He'll be our guest in just a moment. A couple of other things we're keeping our eyes on for you here on the OShow. Doug Ford, he's up to stuff again. Our scandal panel with Keith Leslie and Mark Cripps are going to be back to bring you all the latest insight and analysis, and it's always a fascinating and fun conversation. Plus, we're going to be talking to somebody on the front lines of the fight around homelessness, the level of challenge that's facing us as a country. We need to start talking about what we can do about it. Okay, it's time to get to our main event, to our guest. Welcome to the OShow, Linwood Barclay. You probably know him from seeing his name in every airport. I know I do. Linwood Barclay's books, his international best-selling thrillers, are always on the shelf. And Linwood, I have to make a confession right off the top. Two of them, actually. One of them being that I've always been too much of a chicken to pick up your books because of the thriller genre. And number two, I saw that Stephen King, the king himself of thrillers and horror, just tweeted you that he's only a third of the way through your new book and he's loving the story. I have to confess, I just got it. I am not quite a third of the way. Is this sort of along the line of the other books that you have done? Or are you taking a bit of a different path on this one by getting into some pretty big topical issues?
No, I think it's pretty much in line with what people have come to expect me. I've done a novel a year since 2004. We missed a year with the pandemic because we switched the publishing schedule around. Some years there were two, and this is. I think that if for readers who like what I do, they'll find this is in line with it. I did a book year before last that was a little bit more like a Michael Crichton thriller, a bit of a tech thriller called Look Both Ways that was a bit different. And in fact, I finished back in January a novel that I would call more of a sort of horror supernatural thing, which is out of my lane. See, I wouldn't call this a horror novel. I'd call this a suspense thriller.
Yeah, well, I'm loving it. And I haven't been terrified yet. So I will get through it, I promise. But Linwood, it's so funny to be talking to you because, of course, you and I used to debate politics on a panel, I feel like 20 years ago, maybe. And I remember you invited me to a book signing, which might have been like your first or way back when you moved into doing this. So how is it that you've gone from, doing panels and doing journalism to being a prolific writer? I mean, you are a book a year is crazy, my friend.
Yeah, we would sometimes meet when talking out, I think on Michael Corn's show when he had that program. And that, I think getting on that show grew out of the fact that at the time I was doing 3 columns a week for the Toronto Star. And while allegedly a humor column, there was a lot of sort of political satire in that. I mean, that's how I work out. That's sort of how I work out my grudges are through, humor and being a smartass and so forth. So, but I had worked in newspapers for a very long time. Starting in 1977, which was my first job as a reporter at the Peterborough Examiner. And by 1981, I got hired at the Toronto Star, but as an editor. I went into the job interview, and they said, well, we don't really need reporters. We're desperate for editors to have a lot of editing experience. And I said, sure, which was not really true. But I was an editor in various capacities at the Star until 1993. For 12 years or so at the Star, I was an editor and in various ranks of news editor, assistant city editor, stuff like that. But the thing was writing novels, was really going back to what I'd always wanted to do in the first place. I mean, I was writing novels in my teens and 20s and trying to get them published. And I think I'd written 2 or 3 novels by the time I was 25. And none of them were published. And we can all be grateful, I think, for that. But it was, I did, an outgrowth sort of the columns was I did sort of 3 humor books and a memoir. One of those humor books was called Mike Harris Made Me My Dog, which was a very scholarly piece of work on the premier of the day because it had not just cartoons but footnotes as well.
Ooh, impressive.
And, and so I think that's why I would sometimes end up on a panel where you are encouraged to just shout at each other. Well, that's, I mean, very briefly, but so I mean, I had written starting in 2004, I wrote four sort of what I would call comic thrillers that were not commercial successes. And then the fifth novel I wrote, I decided to write not a funny thriller, but a sort of a dead straight, big concept kind of thriller. And that's the book that kind of went supernova. That's the job. That's the book that allowed me to quit the day job at the Star and stop being a columnist. Because that book, for example, that novel was called No Time for Goodbye, and that book became the single best-selling novel of the year in the UK in 2008, and has done millions of copies. So that allowed me to just do books and give up newspapers. Good time to leave, too, really.
Yeah, seriously. Well, I follow you, of course, on Twitter, and we've chatted, over the socials, but not in person in a very long time. And I've noticed that you are in the UK a lot. Seems like you're there a lot on book tours. Is it particular to that audience, or do you find that is the appeal global at this point?
Well, I'm hopeful it's global. I mean, probably my best market is the UK. I probably do better there than anywhere else. When I back in 2008 or seven, I had a huge bestseller in Germany in translation, and I have had two TV series based on my books made in France. France is a really strong market for me. One was made a few years ago, and they've done another one based on No Time for Goodbye. It hasn't aired yet. I think it's going to air sometime this year. So and I think I'm in about 2 dozen languages at the moment. And so books show up, couriers drop off books at the door, and I open the package and I don't even recognize my name, let alone the title. It's in some sort of script. I don't know what it is, but anyway.
To talk to you more about some current affairs themes that I see running through your work. But can you just tell me about how it feels, Linwood? Like the first time you opened that box with the book inside
Well,
versus now?
it's always, I want to say it never gets old, although we do kind of get used to it. I mean, because I think I Will Ruin You, the new one that came out 2 weeks ago. I think that's the 24th novel. I think it's the 24th novel, and then of course I'm not counting some other books that I've done that were sort of diversions and so forth. And I did two thrillers for young readers a few years ago. I think that it's now a job, like it's like anything else. I mean, that you may do. I mean, I get, and today, as a matter of fact, today I delivered to my publishers the book that is to come out in 2025. So it's a job. You get up in the morning and you go to work. You come upstairs and you just start, staring at the screen until your forehead starts to sweat blood. Simple as that.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if all of those years of editing and cranking it out as a reporter in Peterborough, you got very deadline oriented, right?
Oh yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot. Is what a lot of times people say, well, having worked as a reporter, worked in newspapers, that must be where you get the ideas from for the novels, and maybe some, but I think really what newspapers did was that it taught me the work ethic, and that is that there's all this sort of romanticism around writing and all, when the muse strikes and all this crap. Like to me, there's no romanticism to this at all. It's a job. And I mean, this is my favorite hobby horse, is this whole sort of, people say, well, do you get writer's block? And I think, aren't we adorable as writers that we're just so special that we have a condition to get us out of doing work? Like, is there plumber's block? Is there teacher's block?
I don't get talking block.
I mean, it's a job. So it's pretty much a job. And I mean, it's a great job. I mean, was I telling the other day, once when I was in my teens, and I basically managed a cottage trailer park in the Kawarthas south of Bocage, and one of my daily jobs involved burying fish guts. Writing's better most days. Most days.
So your character Richard in I Will Ruin You, and you got me with the title. I got to be honest. Like I said, some of your other ones looked a little scary to me, but this one I'm like, I think I know where he's going on this one. Richard, the teacher, and please no spoilers, because like I said, I'm not quite a third. He has a self-deprecating humor. His internal dialogue or monologue is one where he second guesses himself. He's very honest about the state of his appeal to his partner, how much impact he really does or does not have on the children that he teaches, on the teenagers. I mean, where is that, knowing you as I have a little bit over the years, you have that same kind of self-deprecating view, and you've already been doing that here in this conversation. Is there a little bit of you in this character?
I think so. There must be a little bit of me in all of these characters. I mean, pretty much the main protagonists in all of my thrillers, and they're usually just very ordinary people who get drawn into extraordinary circumstances.
Mhm.
So I don't write about ex spies or cops or ex mercenaries and all that kind of stuff. I don't know anything about that. And like when I read a Lee Child thriller about Jack Reacher, and I love those, and I know Lee and he's a lovely guy, and I read those and I'm never worried for Reacher. I'm worried for everybody that he's going to beat the snot out of. And
Right.
but my characters are in no way equipped to deal with the kind of evil that they're going to run up against. So my characters have been teachers, landscapers. I had one of my books. I had my hero was a car salesman. They're not typically heroic figures, car salesmen. And so I just write about, these are the people I know. I write about the kinds of jobs that people, that who are friends and so forth are in. I mean, so that's so there's a bit of them. And I mean, and as far as Richard being a teacher, I mean, I think my wife was a teacher, and she taught just about through high school and all the primary grades and kindergarten. And she actually took an early retirement back in the, more than about 15 years ago when my books were doing well, and I was doing tours in Australia and stuff like that. And I thought, you want to be able to come with me. But I could see how hard that she worked as a teacher. It was so much harder than I worked. And I thought that, as I said, I think in the back at the end of this book, in the acknowledgments, that teachers are underpaid, underappreciated, and under attack.
Mhm.
And so I think it's a tough job.
Well, that explains the insight then on twofold, and I'll get to the attack part, because, as I said, coming from my current affairs lens, watching the narrative change around teachers and what goes on and how they are under attack, I thought fascinating. But also, you describe early on a little bit of a side wander that Richard, the teacher, takes, is describing the state of teenagers in this time, like what their challenges are. And, I almost screen captured it to read in our conversation, because as a mom of a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, I am like, wow, what a terrific insight, both because it doesn't come from a place of judgment, Linwood. Like, there was nothing layered in about, typically in the way that adults think about teenagers, right? It was just thinking about the world as they probably experience it, through the lens of this teacher and what's going on in terms of some of the challenges that he faces in the book and with the class. And so, I mean, why did you put that in there? I mean, it wasn't necessary, but I certainly found it enlightening.
I didn't want Richard as this teacher to be a complainer. I figured that if he wants to be a teacher, because he has some empathy and he understands these kids and he sees what they're going through. And it's they're under such, I mean, I talk about teachers being under stress, but so are their students who are dealing with so much stuff and all this pressure on social media. And there's pressure to excel and to perform, and this sense that, if you just fail this one test, then you're going to fail your year, and then you'll never get a good job, and your whole life will be ruined just because you didn't do your homework last night. It's all going to be over. And you've got all sorts of incredible sort of societal pressures on them at the same time that they're supposed to be getting an education, and you wonder, how on earth is that possible? And
Yeah, totally.
Richard gets it.
Go ahead.
Richard gets it. Yeah, Richard gets that.
He does. And you know what? And I loved it. And I'll share that passage with my teenagers at some point, because there's that old, old people on the porch syndrome that we all hit, especially when we have teenagers.
Why do you stay there?
Right. Where you start thinking to yourself, oh my God, where's my rocking chair? But the social media part I can't imagine Linwood. And I mean, it's hard enough. You see the engagement that I go through on social media, trying to promote my values, and the engage, but the kids are just not equipped with the critical thinking at that stage yet. They're still developing their sense of self, and to be inundated, it's like high school on the worst kind of steroids that I can imagine. They're stuck with
Yeah.
anything they do for life. Everything is on the public record. They have no freedom when they get in the door from all the shit that they just left in the schoolyard. I mean, I can't, they have no processing space for everything coming at them. I mean, they have access to everything adults are trying to cope with,
Yes.
at like 8-second speed intervals, So, I mean, I just thought, do you think that adults are as aware as your character Richard about just how much harder it is for kids in 2024?
I don't know. It may be that because I am, despite my advancing years, I'm sort of plugged into a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm on Twitter all the time. I refuse to call it X. I'm on Twitter all the time. The one thing I've never been able to figure out Instagram. Every time I go on Instagram and look at a picture, it vanishes. I have no idea why this happens. It just does. And it's just gone. Every time I look at it, my wife will say, "Look at this picture," and I go, "It's gone. Where did it go?" But
You figured out on Snapchat. I'm just saying, I don't know.
oh God, but so I mean, I have a kind of limited exposure to all this stuff, but I get why it can take over your life.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine. I mean, in the old days when I was in school and we were at school, somebody hated you, they had to come over and tell you.
Right.
Now they just go online and they tell everybody in the world. So
in the moment, there's
I-
no saving yourself. You get in an argument at school, and the whole world has seen it before you've seen it. It's nuts, right?
well, and that happens in the novel too. I mean, there's a thing where Richard is consoling a student who's been through a great personal tragedy, and this may not be something you've gotten to yet, but he's consoling this kid and gives him sort of a hug at that moment. Some other nasty kid takes a picture of it and starts spreading, on wildfire that there's the teacher's a molester because he was hugging this kid, and all he was doing was consoling this kid who lost a parent. But they capture this millisecond
Mhm.
and out of context, and suddenly your life is a nightmare.
One of the themes through the book, it seems to me, is around the overreaction of society, right? And I don't want to overstate it, but just where I am so far, just that example you cited, this idea that I'm forming a narrative about you. I have the ability to capture these micro moments, right? No context, no restrictions on how far and how badly I can damage you. And if you're teaching something I don't like, or if I have some control issues as a parent that I haven't dealt with myself, I can just vilify you and destroy you, and
Yeah.
I'm guessing ruin you, right?
Yes. Yes. And you can. I mean, first and foremost, I think. I mean, it is a thriller. It's about I Will Ruin You is about this Richard who manages to avert what could have been a much worse tragedy when there's a sort of bombing incident at the school, and how that being shoved into the limelight actually, backfires on him, and someone accuses him of something what's happened. But it's still, even when you're doing a thriller, I find ways to sort of, like I said before, I think I have axes to grind, and I find a way to go at them. One of which, of course, in this book is book banning, and Richard gets in trouble because he's been teaching off the curriculum Cormac McCarthy's The Road to his class, because he figures these kids have grown up on The Walking Dead. How on earth are they going to be troubled by The Road? But one kid's a bit squeamish about it, and suddenly there's an incident. It's a big deal all of a sudden, and we get into this whole thing about would your kids be better served if all we gave them to read was pablum?
Right.
We give them nothing that will never upset them, never provoke them, never spark a discussion. Would they be better off if that's what we did?
Mm-hmm. And as a parent who took the opposite approach, where my kids are, involved in our current affairs during the pandemic, they help produce this show and others. Their dad works in, TV news. I mean, there isn't an idea that we haven't discussed with them. And, and some parents find that whatever. But in our world, it was like, I'd rather they have a critical lens and a sense of context, and then they can figure out and they can rebel and they can explore and they can challenge, right? But
Yeah.
not everybody wants to go there. But the reason I go there, Linwood, and I love the story about your mom taking the book away from you when you were a kid because she saw one salty little scene, and you kept digging it out of the closet. I grew up with a fundamentalist Baptist pastor father. He heard me listening to the radio one night when the song "She Blinded Me with Science" came on, heard it and the word science, and took away radio for me for a year. And when
Yeah.
video hits came out, he took away our television access for a couple of years, right? So the idea of being raised in a banning environment is something that I rebelled against. And for my kids, it's like, we might be a little too open as parents. They might have had access to too many adults and too many adult conversations, but they're independent people. They have their own thoughts, they have their own view of the world that isn't something that hopefully that I just kind of tried to shove into them.
Yeah, we can't cocoon them,
Right.
And I mean, of course, that book that my mom took away from me, which was a TV novelization of my favorite TV show.
Yeah.
I now have, over the years, now have, I think, 2 or 3 copies of it, and over my shoulder there's a framed copy of the cover. So, revenge took a long time, but it was sweet.
Perhaps that's why I ended up on TV and radio as a profession. I don't know. Right.
Well, it's like I was this whole sort of book banning thing. When I was a very young reporter and I was starting out, and I was, Margaret Lawrence, the writer Margaret Lawrence was a very close and dear friend of ours. And when there were moves in her own hometown to ban her novel, The Diviners, from the curriculum in the high school, the mind just boggled. And I mean, I still remember interviewing this minister who pointed to a passage in the novel where the character was looking at 2 flies who were, copulating. And he just how objectionable that was. And I remember thinking, man, if that's what you think gets people's rocks off, you need to talk to somebody. And but it was heartbreaking for Margaret, that there was this sort of mentality about that her work was equated with pornography and so forth, when it was nothing of the sort.
I mean, I can't imagine how hard that would have been for her. It's like someone taking everything that you put your heart and soul into and seeing it in a terrible way. I mean, it'd be devastating. So I feel as though that, from those formative experiences you've had where you've seen how banning something didn't work for you, but also seeing how much it harmed your friend, this idea of reducing people to something, pejorative if possible, in the case of trolling and these online attacks and these attacks that teachers are getting, reducing them to a place where, how do you fight back from that? That old expression, a lie goes around the world before the truth gets its boots on. I mean, that's kind of antiquated. Now we're talking about within seconds. And
Oh, yeah.
we'll post this and there'll be many things that are said that won't be true about either one of us or even about what we talked about.
Yeah.
But, so what is your, I'm not asking you for advice per se, but, what is your response to that lurch to ban, to reduce people, to shame people into a point where for some people it can be devastating?
I wish I had the answer. I think the only way to deal with this is to just keep pushing back and
Right.
to expose. I mean, I feel like that we are living in a period where ignorance is celebrated,
Mm.
and to push back against that wherever you can.
Yeah.
And it's a battle you're never going to say, oh, we finally won. It won't happen. It's a constant struggle. It's like the police. The police would never say one day, well, we can just pack up. The break-ins will never happen again. That's not. It's just. But you always have to push back and try to shine a light on the truth, despite all these efforts to befuddle us and to spread all these lies.
So let me just drill down on that a bit, because I think that's fascinating. And I've come to agree with that perspective, right? Is that, and I think Bruce Cockburn said it best, got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. I mean, it feels though sometimes like the darkness is overwhelming. And I know good people, smart people, people with great values who have lots of confidence and inner strength and all the rest of it, who have abandoned the fight because they're like, you know what, it's too much, it's too toxic, it's too depleting of my life. I don't want to be there anymore. I don't want to be on Twitter, or I don't want this, or and I get that. Like, I totally understand it. And because of the work I do, that's neither an option, nor I think would that be a solution for me. But that idea that you've just set, that expectation setting, Linwood, I think is quite brilliant. It's saying, it's never going to be done. There's never going to be a point where we can like pack it in and say, okay, everybody's going to be back to being normal and accepting truth and accepting scientific method and accepting a common state of facts. I mean, it's hard to hear that, but I think you're right, because if we think it's going to end someday, we don't know how long this fight is going to take, and we're not arming ourselves appropriately.
Oh, I mean, we've always had people who spread lies and propaganda. We've always had people who were lunatics. They're just a little more accessible now and more in our face than they used to be. Right. But then we have those same tools at our disposal as well, so we can fight back with the same social websites and so forth. But like I say, it's never going to end.
Yeah. Well, and that's good. And I love the idea of the fight back, and in where there are movements around the world that are trying to push down freedom and push down people's expression and the ability to read whatever books they want, or to attend whatever church they want, or whatever else, as we see that rising tide. I love that point that, rather than kind of sit back and think, oh, there's nothing I can do, it's too big, or it's too crazy, or there's too much of it, that's why I do this show, right? Or anything that I do. It's like, well, is there a moment in here to have a conversation that might enlighten or advance or level set, or, in some way?
And for me, it's always, I mean, in most cases, my way to respond is with humor, or being a smart ass, whichever way you look at it. But I mean, before we had the internet, but at least we had email, back when I was still writing my column at the Star, and I wrote something about somebody, who was probably a slightly right of center. But anyway, I wrote something, and this guy sent me an email, and he said, how can the Toronto Star justify cutting down trees and turning them into newsprint to publish the kind of crap that you write? So I wrote him back, and I said, I share your concern. I'm so fed up that the Star continues to publish me that I have canceled my subscription.
I love
it. The best part was that he wrote back. He said, well, thank you for your honesty. And I went all the time. But
I love it, though. I love it. And I think I mean, keeping that sense of it matters, but it's not everything, and I don't need to internalize or over respond, right? That finding that humorous way of kind of, deflecting it, but also making a point, I think is quite brilliant. Now we're not, I hope that guy framed that letter, and maybe he can get some money off of it.
I just feel if you respond with just vitriol and anger, that you've let them win. They've provoked you to the point that you've just sunk to their level. If you can find a sort of funny, I mean, you can probably follow Rick Wilson on Twitter. And he's like, everybody's just taking shots at him. And I don't even know why they bother. Or David Simon, who's like, who did The Wire and is a great, former reporter. I mean, they handle idiots so beautifully. They don't come back with, oh yeah, well, so's your mom. That kind of, I mean, that's it tends to be a little more witty than that.
Well, I had Brittlestar on the pod for the long weekend, and he's a master at it as well, and he was just talking about the same kind of thing. His whole thing was around jerks, like, we need not deal with jerks. Life's too short for jerks, and I think he makes an excellent point. So, last question for you: when you are writing a character like Richard, and he has clear thoughts about parenting and about youth and about their access to information, and that whole idea of developing a critical mind, and having the independence of thought, do you use your novels in a way to make those points, to sort of use that humor and use that insight, but use the massive platform globally you have now to push not a political agenda, but certainly your book is imbued with opinions.
I wouldn't presume to preach or to presume to think that I'm having some sort of impact on those kinds of points. I write what I want to write. I write to entertain. And as you said, sometimes I have axes to grind that end up in the book. And, if people like it or don't like it, I mean, it's whatever. But I make no presumption that there's a single word I write that's going to have any impact on anybody. You just write it, you put it out there, and, you just, who knows what will happen.
Obviously, people are loving it. And I am excited because, like you, as a child, I consumed voraciously the Hardy Boys series. I don't know if you did you do the Three Investigators? Did you ever get into those? It was another,
Which one?
the Three Investigators. It was
No,
about,
I didn't do this. I graduated from Hardy Boys and went straight to Agatha Christie.
oh, me too,
And,
me too, right? Awesome.
and the Nero Wolfe novels by Rex Stout. I devoured all of that stuff like crazy once I was sort of done with the Hardy Boys. And then around about the age of 15, I started moving up and I started reading, Ross MacDonald and Raymond Chandler and all that kind of stuff. So, so that one you mentioned, that one I don't know. There was a prequel to reading about Tom Swift and all his amazing adventures, which were all kind of ridiculous. But
there were three kids who lived in, they had a little clubhouse in a junkyard, and they would, they do Hardy Boys type investigations. But I'm like you. I went to Agatha Christie and a bunch of others and along that genre. I'm excited though, because as my husband Rob can tell you, when I get a good book, I do devour. And now I have about, what'd you say, 20 that I've got to catch up on, Linwood. So
yeah, you got a ways to go back. Yeah, I can send you a list. I can send you a list of the ones you should skip.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I'll take that. But I have my summer reading ahead of me. And thank you both for writing such a thoughtful novel on something that's currently happening in our society from the perspective of a teacher. But as I said, you also somehow managed to do it from the perspective of the students as well. And I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of that. And hopefully, my take so far is, ideas aren't something to be scared of. There's something to be explored and to be worked through. And I think that that's a message that's important for us all to hear right now. That's what I'm taking away so far. But like I said, I'm only a third of the way, Linwood. So my opinion might totally change. And if my review sucks, I'll post it for you for sure. I promise.
It was a pleasure. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Take care and congratulations on all your success.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the OShow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the OShow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the OShow. It's the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the OShow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the OShow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the OShow. It's a podcast, the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. Stay informed with the OShow, OShow.
Your merch bin.